Chapter 1. I've always loved the thrill of staying in old historic hotels. There's something about the creaking floors, the grand staircases, and the rich history that draws me in. This time, my travels brought me to the Whitewood Inn, an imposing Victorian structure nestled deep in the heart of New England. When I checked in, the receptionist, an elderly woman with a stern expression, handed me the key to room 713. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she warned, "Don't leave your door unlocked at night." I chuckled, thinking it was just a quaint attempt to add to the inn's eerie atmosphere. Little did I know how serious she was. The room was exactly as I hoped. High ceilings, antique furniture, and an unsettling painting of a woman staring blankly at the bed. As I unpacked, a cold draft brushed my neck. I shrugged it off as a quirk of the old building and decided to explore the town. Upon returning that evening, I noticed the atmosphere in the inn had changed. The dim lighting cast long, sinister shadows, and the creaks and groans of the building seemed louder, more pronounced. I made my way to room 713, locked the door as the receptionist had advised, and settled into bed. I woke up at 3:13 a.m. to the sound of whispering. My heart pounded as I strained to make out the words, but they were unintelligible, like a distant conversation in another language. The room had become icy cold. I glanced around, but nothing seemed out of place, except for the painting. The woman's eyes, once lifeless, now seemed to be glaring directly at me. I told myself it was just my imagination, the power of suggestion playing tricks on me. I turned on the bedside lamp, trying to dispel the darkness and fear. That's when I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered locking it. My stomach churned as I got up to close it, making sure to double-check the lock this time. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. I felt a presence behind me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. Unable to sleep, I decided to research the inn's history. What I found chilled me to the bone. Room 713 was notorious for its haunting. Years ago, a young woman named Eliza stayed in that very room. She had been found dead, her body mangled in an inexplicable manner, and her death was ruled an unsolved mystery. Since then, guests had reported strange occurrences, many leaving in the middle of the night, never to return. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I stayed up, my laptop's glow the only light in the room. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the temperature plummeted again, and my laptop shut off. The whispers returned, clearer now, repeating a single word, "Leave." Suddenly, I felt a searing pain on my arm. Looking down, I saw 3 deep scratches forming, blood trickling down. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my bag and fled the room, not daring to look back. The hallway was empty, eerily silent, and the receptionist was nowhere to be found. I spent the rest of the night in my car, watching the inn from a distance. As dawn broke, I saw her, the woman from the painting, standing at my window, her eyes burning with an otherworldly rage. She mouthed the word "leave" one last time before vanishing into thin air. I never retrieved my belongings from room 713. I drove away as fast as I could, vowing never to return to the Whitewood Inn. To this day, I'm haunted by that night, the whispers still echoing in my mind, and the scar on my arm a permanent reminder of the terror I faced. If you ever find yourself in New England, and someone offers you a key to room 713, take my advice. Refuse it and leave immediately. Some doors are better left unopened. Leaving the Whitewood Inn in my rearview mirror didn't bring the peace I had hoped for. The whispers, the woman's burning eyes, and the icy cold that had gripped room 713 haunted my thoughts. I tried to push it all aside, convincing myself it was nothing more than a bad dream. But the deep scratches on my arm were undeniable proof that something very real had happened that night. A few weeks passed, and I settled back into my routine, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye, or hear a faint whisper just as I was falling asleep. My friends noticed the change in me and suggested I talk to someone about my experience. But how could I explain the unexplainable? One evening, while sifting through old books at a local antique shop, I stumbled upon a tattered journal. It looked ancient, with yellowed pages and a leather cover that was falling apart. What caught my attention was the inscription on the first page, Eliza's Diary. My heart raced as I realized this might be the same Eliza connected to room 713. I purchased the journal, desperate for answers. Back home, I carefully opened the journal. Eliza had been a frequent traveler, much like myself. Her entries began innocuously enough. Descriptions of places she visited, people she met, and the hotels she stayed in. But as I read further, her tone changed. She wrote about unsettling encounters, a sense of being followed, and disturbing dreams. The last entry was dated the night before she was found dead in room 713. "I hear them at night," she wrote. "The whispers. They tell me to leave, but something holds me here. I see her in my dreams. A woman with hollow eyes, burning with anger. She wants something from me, but I don't know what. I fear my time is running out." My blood ran cold. The similarities between Eliza's experiences and my own were too striking to ignore. The woman in the painting, the whispers, the sense of being watched, it was all connected. I needed to know more. I decided to return to the Whitewood Inn, despite every instinct screaming against it. Armed with Eliza's diary and a renewed sense of determination, I drove back to New England. The inn looked as foreboding as ever, its Victorian architecture casting long shadows in the twilight. The same elderly receptionist was there, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw me. "You came back," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and concern. "Why?" "I need answers," I replied, showing her the diary. "About Eliza, about room 713. She sighed deeply, motioning for me to follow her into a small back office. "I've worked here for decades," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eliza was one of many. Room 713 is cursed. They say a woman, Abigail Whitewood, the inn's original owner, haunts it. She was driven mad by grief after losing her family in a tragic accident. Her spirit is restless, seeking vengeance or perhaps peace, but no one knows for sure." I shared my experience with her, and she nodded, as if she'd heard it all before. Eliza's death was just one of many mysteries. The whispers, the apparitions, they're all Abigail's doing. She's trapped between worlds, her sorrow and rage binding her to this place. Determined to help Abigail find peace and to end the haunting, I spent the night in room 713 again. Armed with the diary and a few candles, I set up a small ritual, hoping to communicate with Abigail's spirit. The whispers began almost immediately, growing louder and more coherent. "Abigail," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "I'm here to help you. Tell me what you need." The room grew colder, the candles flickering violently. Then a figure appeared, a translucent woman in a Victorian gown, her eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. "My family," she whispered. "I need them." Using Eliza's diary, I pieced together the locations of the Whitewood family graves, long forgotten and neglected in a cemetery nearby. With the inn staff's help, we conducted a small ceremony, honoring Abigail and her family, and finally laying their spirits to rest. As dawn broke, the oppressive atmosphere of the inn lifted. The whispers ceased, and the sense of being watched vanished. The elderly receptionist thanked me with tears in her eyes, and I left the Whitewood Inn, knowing I had finally put the spirits to rest. The scars on my arm faded over time, but the memory of that night remains vivid. I still love old hotels and the thrill of the unknown, but I now approach them with a new respect, knowing that some histories are best left undisturbed. Chapter 2. The drive to the Blue Raven was long and winding, through dense forests and up narrow, fog-covered roads. When I finally arrived, the hotel loomed before me like a dark sentinel. It was an imposing Victorian mansion, its Gothic architecture both beautiful and foreboding. The windows were dark, and the place seemed abandoned, yet there was a strange allure to it. I parked my car and approached the grand entrance. The massive wooden doors creaked open as I pushed them, revealing a dimly lit lobby. The air inside was cool, almost chilly, and smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The lobby was magnificent, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and antique furniture. At its center was a grand staircase, leading to the upper floors. An old grandfather clock stood against one wall, its hands frozen at midnight. The only sign of life was the concierge, a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes. He stood behind the reception desk, watching me with an unsettling intensity. "Mr. Bennett, I presume?" he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Welcome to the Blue Raven Hotel. I am Mr. Carlyle." I nodded, trying to shake off the creeping unease that his presence stirred within me. "Thank you for the invitation. The place is impressive." "Indeed," he replied, a faint smile curling his lips. "Let me show you to your room." As we walked through the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Shadows seemed to move just beyond the edge of my vision, and I could hear faint whispers, too soft to make out. My room was on the 3rd floor, a lavish suite with antique furnishings and a large 4-poster bed. The walls were lined with dark, heavy drapes, and the only light came from a flickering chandelier overhead. Mr. Carlyle left me with a final, chilling remark. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Bennett. The Blue Raven has a way of making memories that last forever." I tried to ignore the ominous tone in his voice as I unpacked. The room was beautiful, but there was something off about it. The air felt heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As night fell, the atmosphere in the hotel grew more oppressive. I decided to explore the lobby again, hoping to find something that would explain the strange sensations I was experiencing. The lobby was even more eerie at night. The chandeliers cast long shadows, and the silence was punctuated by the occasional creak of the building settling. I wandered around, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I noticed a large painting on one of the walls, depicting a grand ballroom filled with people in Victorian attire. Their faces were pale and lifeless, their eyes hollow. As I stared at the painting, I could have sworn the figures moved, their heads turning to look at me. A sudden cold draft made me shiver, and I turned to see a figure standing in the middle of the lobby. It was a woman in a white dress, her hair flowing around her face. She seemed to be staring at something only she could see. I approached her slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. She turned to me, her eyes wide and filled with terror. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "He won't let you leave." Before I could respond, she vanished, leaving me standing alone in the cold, empty lobby. I hurried back to my room, my mind racing. Who was she? And what did she mean by, "He won't let you leave"? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was something deeply wrong with the Blue Raven Hotel. I decided to do some research. I pulled out my laptop and searched for any information I could find about the hotel. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. The Blue Raven had a long and dark history. It was built in the late 1800s by a wealthy businessman named Jonathan Carlyle, the very man who had invited me. Carlyle was known for his cruel and sadistic nature. He was rumored to have dabbled in the occult, performing dark rituals in the hotel. Many guests and staff had disappeared over the years, their bodies never found. The hotel was eventually abandoned, and Carlyle himself vanished without a trace. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to confront Carlyle. I made my way back to the lobby, determined to get answers. As I entered, the atmosphere grew even colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. "Mr. Carlyle," I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty lobby. "Show yourself." He appeared out of the shadows, his cold blue eyes gleaming with malice. "Ah, Mr. Bennett, I see you've discovered the truth. Why did you bring me here?" I demanded. "What do you want?" He smiled, a cruel and twisted grin. "I want what I have always wanted, Mr. Bennett, to trap souls within these walls, to feed on their fear and despair. You are just the latest addition to my collection." I felt a surge of anger and fear. "You won't get away with this." Carlyle laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the lobby. "Oh, but I already have. You see, Mr. Bennett, once you enter the Blue Raven, you can never leave. Desperation filled me as I realized the truth of his words. I had to find a way out. I ran through the lobby, searching for an exit, but the doors were locked, the windows barred. The shadows seemed to come alive, reaching out to grab me. In my panic, I remembered the woman in white. She had warned me. Perhaps she could help. I called out to her, my voice echoing through the empty halls. Please, I need your help. She appeared before me, her face filled with sorrow. There's only one way to escape, she said. You must break the curse. How? I asked desperately. Find the source of his power, she replied. Destroy it, and the hotel will be free. With her guidance, I made my way to the basement, where Carlisle's dark rituals had taken place. The air grew colder as I descended, and I could hear the faint whispers of trapped souls. At the center of the room was an altar, covered in symbols and dark artifacts. Carlisle appeared before me, his eyes blazing with fury. You cannot destroy me, Mr. Bennett. I am eternal. I ignored his taunts and focused on the altar. I grabbed one of the artifacts, a dark, twisted dagger, and plunged it into the heart of the altar. A deafening scream filled the air as the symbols began to glow and the dark energy was released. Carlisle's form wavered, his power weakening. No, you cannot do this. But it was too late. The hotel began to shake, the walls cracking and the shadows dissipating. The souls of the trapped guests were freed, their whispers turning to cries of joy. As the sun rose, I found myself standing outside the Blue Raven Hotel, the once imposing structure now reduced to ruins. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the ordeal lift from my shoulders. I knew I would never forget the horrors I had faced within those walls, but I had survived. And with the dawn came the promise of a new beginning, free from the curse of the Blue Raven Hotel. As I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder how many more such places existed, hidden away, waiting for their next victim. But one thing was certain, I would never again underestimate the power of the supernatural.